On January 24, 1848, James Marshall, a carpenter from New Jersey, discovered gold in the mill race of a sawmill along the American River east of Sacramento, touching off the gold rush that accelerated the population of California. By mid-June of that year, San Francisco stood half empty, 3/4 of its men off to the mines, most stores closed, and outbound ships at anchor abandoned by their crews. In Monterey, doubts about an abundance of gold persisted until a sailor brought 136 ounces of the rare yellow metal from the Yuba River, touching off a spasm in the community. Upon seeing the gold, carpenters at work on a schoolhouse threw down their tools and joined seamen and soldiers in the rush to the Yuba River. Such was the reaction across much of the United States and much of the globe to the news that rivers like the Yuba, Feather, and American were lined with gold. Strangers from America, China, and Europe converged on California, first in search of gold, later to farm or pursue other careers.
From 1840 to 1870, some 500,000 people migrated to California. Most stayed and are buried in pioneer cemeteries like this one, the Marysville City Cemetery. The Marysville City Cemetery is the oldest city-owned cemetery west of the Mississippi River. There are 10,000 people buried here. That's almost as many people who live inside Marysville's levees today.
Among those buried here are gold miners, murder victims, statesmen, Civil War soldiers, children, and many with accomplishments significant to the history of this region, the state, and the world. Harriet Pike, a member of the tragically snowbound Donner Party in 1846, is among those buried here. Harriet survived the Donner Party tragedy by walking for 32 days through snow 20 feet deep. She returned to the party with help one day after her infant child had died of starvation. She married early Marysville landowner Michael Nye. Although her story is much more incredible, Harriet is not nearly as well known as her sister, Mary Murphy Covilod, after whom the city of Marysville was named.
The Marysville City Cemetery is the final resting place of other interesting and historical figures. Edward Duplex and his family are buried here. Duplex was a successful miner who made his fortune at the Sweet Vengeance mine in Spring Valley. He later owned barbershops in Yuba City, Marysville, and Wheatland. In 1868, 4 years after the end of the Civil War, he was elected mayor of Wheatland. He thus became the first African-American elected mayor of a city west of the Mississippi.
Charles Macy and his brother founded the first Macy's store in the United States in 1850 in Marysville. That first store went bankrupt, but today there are Macy's stores in almost every large American city.
This is also the final resting place of Charles DeLong, who came to Marysville in the 1850s.
He served in the State Assembly and Senate and was appointed the first minister to Japan by President Grant in 1869. While in Japan, DeLong was the first man to fly a foreign flag, the U.S. Stars and Stripes, on Japanese soil.
His infant son, Reed, was born and died in Japan, and his body was brought back to be buried here in the Marysville City Cemetery.
The cemetery is certainly one of the first non-Native American cemeteries of any size in California. Due to the settlement patterns in the Gold Rush period, Marysville was for one brief moment in history a California city, second in size only to San Francisco. The people buried in this cemetery were born in places like Germany, Scotland, China, Japan, and Iowa. The names of people buried here are the same names we see on many of the streets and schools in Marysville. In 1994, the state of California designated this cemetery as a site of historical interest. There is much work, however, that needs to be done to restore the cemetery to its pioneer-era condition. Unfortunately, the Marysville City Cemetery is located outside of the ring of levees which protect the city from flooding. This was not always the case. When construction of mud fences, as early levees were called, began in the 1850s, the cemetery was included in the area protected from flooding. But just as the cemetery today is a symbol of our history, it is a victim of that same history. Following a disastrous flood of 1875, the city's residents made a decision that unwittingly led to the neglect of the dead buried in the cemetery. Deciding the Feather and Yuba rivers needed more area for its waters at flood stage, the city realigned the levee system, leaving some 40 square blocks of Marysville, including the cemetery, unprotected. The frequent flooding of the cemetery over the years has silted over the cemetery's grave sites and roads. Greater damage has been inflicted, however, by decades of vandalism and general neglect. Tombstones have been broken or stolen, and several crypts have been robbed. Not since the levee realignment 119 years ago has a Marysville levee failed, but the town's cemetery, out of sight and often out of the minds of current residents, was fading into oblivion. In the past several years, however, directly as a result of the interest of Marysville postman Dick Marquette in the research of the history of Marysville and the city cemetery, a largely private effort to reclaim the cemetery has ensued. This effort has brought together hundreds of individuals in an ambitious attempt to restore the cemetery to a condition that honors those interred there, a condition which shows that the community cares. Dick Marquette's interest led to a volunteer effort to reclaim roads, grave sites, and grave markers.
It's the oldest piece of history in Marysville that people can put their hands on today.
Kim Aldean, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has played an active role in the volunteer effort.
Well, the cemetery is a huge area. It's about 14 acres. It's in drastic disrepair. There's a lot of brickwork that needs to be laid out there. What I see with it is an opportunity for the entire community to get together and do a lot of work.
Through the efforts of Marquette, Aldean, John Cook, Tykert Construction Company, the California Conservation Corps, and many others, the first steps of restoring the cemetery have occurred. But continuing the task will require the assistance of many more people from the community.
A Marysville City Cemetery Commission has been formed to coordinate and augment the private restoration efforts. Several ideas are being considered, including an Adopt a Plot program. It is only through community efforts that the Marysville City Cemetery will be restored to its pioneer condition.
If you would like to become involved in the efforts to restore the cemetery by volunteering labor, or if you simply want more information about the cemetery, please write down the following address: Help the Cemetery, Marysville City Cemetery Commission, P.O. Box 150, Marysville, California, 95901.